Oh, good.
All right, great. So today is what makes a good planting site. And we are hoping to have neighborhoods that look more like this picture on the right than this picture on the left. What a big difference the trees make in these photos. So we're hoping to find some good planting sites so that they look more like that nice shady green image. Just a friendly reminder, y'all probably know this by now, but if you wouldn't mind keeping yourself on mute, unless you are asking a question or making a comment, in which case chime in, please. Go ahead and unmute yourself. I also have the powers to mute you. So if there's any accidental background noise, I will take advantage of those powers. Today is what makes a good planting site. This is the third session in a series of 4 called Canopy Conversations. The next one is September 9th, and that is living with trees, and it's going to be about the long-term care and maintenance of your trees. So today we're first going to talk about the different types of planting sites that exist, kind of what are the differences, what exactly, is the right of way, what's private property versus public, what are the different, rules and regulations with some of those, and then we'll be talking about the right tree in the right place, which is a really important mantra when you are figuring out where to plant trees in your yard. We kind of did this already, so we might skip over this later, but we'll make sure that everybody who has joined has been introduced, and you kind of can share your reactions and thoughts to this kind of presentation at the beginning. And then we're going to open it up for conversation with the group. So what are kind of your, oh, you know what? That's a little bit outdated. I apologize. There's a different small group question at the end. We're going to be talking about any surprises or things that you have learned, maybe things you already knew that were kind of driven home, or ideas for planting sites in your own neighborhood. So just very quickly, want to start off with just a little bit of context about what is the Root Nashville campaign. I know several of you are already pretty familiar with this already, or becoming familiar because you are receiving a tree perhaps from us for the fall. But just to start us off here, what is Root Nashville? We are a campaign to plant many, many trees in Nashville. The goal is 500,000 trees by 2050 in Davidson County. And this is a citywide campaign. So the trees that we are planting as part of the campaign, of course, count towards this goal, but also any other trees that other individuals count count towards this goal. And you can see all the different planting groups and partners listed on the map that we have listed on our website. This really is an effort led by the whole city. So this is a structured as a public-private partnership. So I work at the Cumberland River Compact, and that is the kind of day-to-day headquarters and operations for the campaign. But Root Nashville is also a Metro initiative, and they're key lead and key partner in the campaign, especially the Metro Water Services Department, because of the many benefits that trees provide to stormwater quality and to water quality in general. So why are we planting so many trees now? This isn't new in Nashville. There have been planting organizations and efforts that have been going on for a long time, but the Root Nashville campaign itself is pretty new, launched in 2018. And this is a really big push. That's kind of the first time it's been a full citywide effort, and all of these different groups and efforts working together because Nashville is losing trees. We're losing thousands of trees every year to development and also to old age. Our canopy is just getting older. It doesn't help when we have storms like tornadoes and derecho windstorms coming through that also can damage and destroy thousands of trees as well. We have something called the emerald ash borer that is now here in Nashville that is unfortunately going to kill all of our native ash trees. And that's estimated to be perhaps 4 to 6% of our entire canopy that we will also be losing to this. So it's really, really important. That's why the Root Nashville campaign was launched, is because Nashville is losing so many trees, and yet trees give us so many benefits. We're planting all over Davidson County, but really focused in what we call impact areas. And these areas are Madison, North Nashville, and South Nashville, kind of as outlined on this map. The colors don't refer to anything in general, just to kind of differentiate the areas. But these were identified as areas that have lower tree canopy cover, and that also have other kind of important data pieces that trees can really benefit. So these are also areas that have higher rates of asthma hospitalizations, areas that have greater numbers of polluted or impaired streams and waterways, and areas that have more vulnerable populations that are susceptible to heat-related illness. So these are all areas that can really, really benefit from trees the most. We do plant everywhere, but we do focus kind of in these areas to create a more equitable tree canopy. All right, so we're going to start today by thinking about the big picture, kind of zooming out. What makes a good planting site? Let's first kind of get into what are the different types of property kind of in the first place, private, public property, how do you get trees in different ways here in Nashville for these different types of property. So first of all, private is really anything that is not owned by the government. So this is a ton of different types of sites. This is your own yard, right? Your front and your backyard. These are businesses, churches, nonprofits, anything that is not here in Nashville owned by metropolitan government. So this is the vast majority of property in Davidson County. It is a little unusual how much of our area is in fact private property. 94% of Davidson County is in fact privately owned, and just that 6% or so is owned by Metro. So on that 6%, Metro, as a key lead in the Root Nashville campaign, has planted a significant portion of the trees in the campaign so far. They're really committed to this goal because of the many benefits that trees provide, but that's on such a small sliver of land in the big picture. So private property is really something that we, through the Cumberland River Compact kind of arm of the Root Nashville campaign, are really focused on right now, because it is just the vast majority of space in Nashville and in our area. So there's so much potential there to do restoration and to replant, what has been lost just on your yards, really your front and your backyards, in addition to some of these other kinds of properties. So how do you actually get trees to private properties? You're pretty much the best way to do so is to go through nonprofits, right, for private property. So one thing I would definitely want to plug and mention is that through the Root Nashville campaign, we have a program called the Neighborhood Planting Captain Program. And in this program, you can apply to become a captain. And if you are accepted and you become a captain, you are awarded a certain number of free, large 1-inch caliper trees that you are then responsible for kind of getting the word out in your neighborhood and kind of finding homes for those trees in your neighborhood. We provide the sign-up link. We provide some flyers kind of with your neighborhood's custom information, try to make it as easy as possible for you to get the word out in kind of a more grassroots peer-to-peer way. We found that has been more successful in getting people signed up if we have those local advocates. So this is a way you can bring trees to your own neighborhood. They can go anywhere that people choose to do so. That can go in your front yard or in your backyard. Not the public right-of-way that we will talk about here in a minute, but this is where people can decide on their own where they would like trees planted on their own private property. I would also just keep an eye out on all of the different partners in the Root Nashville campaign, because there are often different types of giveaways where you can kind of individually pick up trees for your own front or backyard. So definitely follow the Root Nashville campaign, but also the Cumberland River Compact, the National Tree Foundation, Tennessee Environmental Council, the Nashville Tree Conservation Corps, and even others. So we try to share whenever there are opportunities from some of these partners, and that is a way that you can get trees on your own private property. I will say the Nashville Tree Conservation Corps also does a tree sale. Once you can order trees anytime throughout the year, but those trees are then delivered during the planting season, which starts in about mid-October through about the end of March or so. So that's private property. So public property here in Nashville is really anything that's not that private property, right? So this is everything that is owned by the city. So this can include parks, libraries, schools, public housing, the right-of-way, which we'll get into a little bit more. And I also wanted to mention these flood buyout sites. I will say too, I will send out these slides to you afterwards with links to some of these things that we are discussing. And I will send out a link to some information about what exactly are flood buyout sites. So these are areas that have flooded flooded historically, especially in the 2010 flood that Metro has then purchased, because it's not, safe or wise to continue rebuilding houses on these properties. So these used to be private properties. Now they're Metro properties, and we do partner a lot with Metro Water in particular to plant trees on these sites so they can soak up all that water so the flooding isn't so bad in the future. And let's get into the right-of-way and what that means. So the right-of-way is public property. It is Metro owned. And we get a lot of questions about what exactly the right-of-way means, what exactly are, street trees planted in the right-of-way. And I will do my best to answer those questions, but if you have additional ones, please chime in. It is tricky because it's a little bit of a gray area. So typically the right-of-way is going to be about 6 feet or so from the road into, what seems or what feels like your yard or your property. So generally, the guideline for where this area starts or what exactly is where your water meter is. So this kind of photo here in the bottom, you can see the red boxes are kind of the water meter, and generally from the water meter kind of forward to the street, that is all considered public right-of-way, Metro-owned public right-of-way. This is the case even if you do not have sidewalks. So this is a common question that we hear from people is like, oh, well, I don't have, a planting strip in my yard. I don't have sidewalks. So like, this doesn't apply to me, right? No, it actually does apply to you. You do have this kind of right-of-way area in your yard. And this image kind of up here on the top left kind of shows the different types, right? So even if you have no sidewalk, this is still kind of considered the public right-of-way. This 10 feet kind of marker here is not hard and fast. I will say it's generally usually closer to about 6. But this is also the case if there's an attached sidewalk that does not have that planting strip, or if there is a sidewalk that does have that planting strip kind of here in the middle. So all of these kind of different types of edging or public property, you would say this right-of-way, these are all potential locations for street trees. And these would be trees that, because they're in the right-of-way, would be under the jurisdiction of Metro, of our, public property, of our government. So even if you don't have a sidewalk, you can kind of potentially be in the running for street tree plantings. Or if you don't have this planting strip, like this photo or this image at the bottom, if you have a sidewalk, this area just outside the sidewalk right here is the right-of-way and is a potential location for street trees. So right now, the Root Nashville campaign, really led by Metro Water, is working on street tree plantings specifically in these impact areas. So in Madison, in North Nashville, in South Nashville, with multi-year plans, expanding those and growing outward and kind of reaching the whole city, hopefully. So these are going in all 3 of these examples right here. So they're going in planting strips. They're also going in areas just outside the sidewalk in this right-of-way, and also in areas that do not have any sidewalk. So I'll kind of pause here because this is often an area where people have questions or concerns or things they're wondering. So I'll kind of pause. Does anyone have questions about the right-of-way and what exactly that means?
I might be jumping the gun because you might be getting to this. Does the street have to be owned by Metro and not be a state road for this to be applicable?
That is a super good question. So in this, I'll have to send out information following this presentation because I did not have that included, and it should be included in here. So I'm really glad that you mentioned it. There are, areas owned by TDOT, right? So not our new NDOT, our new Public Works Department, kind of reforming. There are areas that are just owned by the state that actually do not have this kind of right-of-way that are owned by Metro, and it's kind of purely state-owned. So I'm thinking, I live up in Madison, and there's this kind of State Route 45 that has these beautiful planting medians in the middle of the road that look like they could be potential planting sites. sites, but that is going to be working with the state instead of working with the city in order to kind of see if that's a potential planting site. So does that answer your question a little bit there, Jen?
Yeah, definitely. And then maybe a dumb question, but is there some master list where I can easily find out what is a state road? Like if the signage doesn't have a number assigned to it, but it is a state road, and for example, like I think Bell Road is a state road in Antioch, and I only just learned that.
Another great question. And I'll send up some kind of additional links and information to help you find that out, because it can be a little bit tricky. Like, wait a second, like I thought all these roads were metro and you're telling me Bell Road is not. So I'll send out some information afterwards about how to determine that. That's a good question.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Anything else on right away here before we keep going? All right. So for these kinds of property, for public property, right, which does include this right of way, does include where street trees can be planted. How do you get trees planted in these areas, right? Talk through some of these ideas, but there is a opportunity called the Metro Tree Bank, and I've mentioned this a little bit in past Canopy Conversations. But basically, this is a bank that can be tapped into by a metro department to plant trees on public property. So this is a bank of funds that developers are paying into when they cannot meet the requirements for trees on their property. So if they are, they need to meet a certain tree density, and if they cannot meet that, they then need to pay into this bank so that it can be used for areas that can have trees. So it does need to be a metro department that applies to use these funds, but often it involves a nonprofit and a metro department, and there needs to be kind of neighborhood support in order to make these kinds of plantings happen. So if you live in an area that could, you think it would be great for street trees, for example, and you would like to make that happen, really kind of starting with, you can start with the Root Nashville campaign if you'd like, kind of start from the nonprofit route and say, hey, this is what I'm interested in. What are the next steps? How does this work? We could kind of guide you through that process of working with which metro department is the right department to go with for street trees. It is going to be with Metro Water and NDOT kind of in partnership to make that application happen. But that is absolutely something that we would love to help you with if that's something you're interested in for your neighborhood. This is also something great to kind of ping. I know we have several beautification commissioners on the call here today to kind of talk to them or talk to your council member about and say, hey, we're interested in street trees. Can you help me make this happen? And it is very much a partnership driven process because there are these kind of different kind of partners and routes to make this happen along the way. It does require a pretty significant amount of planning on the front end. So if you are interested in street trees in certain areas for the next planting season, now is really the time to get moving along those. I know it still feels like so hot and this is not the right time to plant trees, and it's not, but it is the right time to be planning for the fall. So the planting season is about mid-October through end of March again. So if you're interested in that, the sooner you can get moving on these ideas, the better, because it does take, there's lots of levers and kind of moving pieces to make these kinds of plantings happen. And it's not just street trees, I will say. It can also be parks, it can also be libraries, any metro-owned property. And we really do want to get more neighborhoods and community leaders involved in kind of advocating for areas in their neighborhood. So it goes a long way when you speak up and you say, hey, here's a site that's, metro-owned property in my neighborhood. This one park could really use some more trees. I'd love to make it happen. That really does go a long way in actually making that happen. So really do encourage you to make those suggestions and to reach out to some of these kind of leaders and people mentioned here. If you're wondering whether a particular site is private or public, if you're not sure, sometimes it can be confusing, especially with the flood buyout sites. You're like, there's that lot on the corner that doesn't have a house on it. Is that a flood buyout site or not? You can find out through Parcel Viewer. This is totally public. It's through the planning department. I've got the link there at the bottom, and again, I'll send that out to you afterwards, but there's a tab where you can type in an address and it will pop right up. This is Madison Park up here in Madison, and you can see that it says owner, Metro Government. And this is my house over here. You can see the owner is my landlord. So you can kind of find out whether that is private or publicly owned through Parcel Viewer as well. So it's a pretty handy tool. So that's the really big picture, right? Kind of this zoomed out. What are these different types of areas that you can plant on, private, public? What are the different routes for getting trees to those areas? So now we're going to kind of zoom in and kind of more specifically talk about your yard and getting the right tree to the right place. But I'll pause there for a moment too, before we kind of get into this next section. Any kind of questions on this public versus private idea, or the Metro Tree Bank, or how any of these things work? If you think of some, you have my email, I think. I'll make sure you have it, and can always follow up if something pops up to you later. Questions come up later. So let's get into this kind of zoomed in approach of what makes a planting site. So this is something you will hear in the tree world over and over. This is a really important mantra. I probably say at every presentation about trees ever, but it's so important to get the right tree to the right place. This is something you'll hear all the time, and it's really important to think about ahead of time, because trees do live a long time, of course, and they do grow and can often get really big. So it's important to kind of think about these things on the front end, and kind of think about what potential problems could come up in the future that you could avoid by just moving the tree a little bit and getting it into the right place. I should also mention we are joined today by my dog Mavis. You might hear her occasionally in the background. This is her. She's sleeping on 2 beds because she is a princess. She was just yawning. That was not me. I'm pumped and energized and ready to be here. It's her making that noise. So with this right tree, right place, it can kind of seem like a chicken and egg situation, right? Like, what comes first? Do you pick what kind of tree you want first, or do you pick where in your yard you want the tree to go? I will say usually most people get attached to a certain type of tree and then work from the species to then finding a place in your yard where it will fit. When typically it's okay to do that, but typically you actually kind of want to think about it this way, and that's the right place, right tree. Think about where in your yard you would like a tree to go, and then kind of see what species would work best in that area. For those of you who have signed up for trees or receiving trees for the fall or later in the year, maybe you already have your tree species picked out. So you're kind of doing this a little bit backwards. That's totally okay. It's just important to make sure that you're kind of considering what goes where, but way ahead of time before you ever get that tree in the ground. So big picture, something to kind of think about and just remember is kind of where we are geographically, right? Kind of zoom way out here. This is a tool from the USDA about plant hardiness. It's typically more used for gardening and kind of vegetable gardens and flowers and that kind of thing, but it can also just be helpful to know for trees as well. Trees are generally a little bit tougher and more resilient than some of these other kind of smaller plants, but you can get into this and learn a lot more about our specific area where we are, and that can inform, you know, what kind of tree you might choose. And also kind of think about the topography, right, of where we live. So Davidson County, if you can see it, it's a little bit blurry, right here in the state, right? And you can see what that means. Let me move my Zoom box here a little bit. So most of Davidson County falls into the Nashville Basin, right? Parts of it are a little bit higher, this highland rim, but most of it is actually, compared to the land around us, lower in a basin, right? It's a little bit more low-lying. That's why you can drive almost 30 minutes or so in any direction and come across beautiful waterfalls, because we're actually in this lower area, this basin. And that's just something kind of to keep in mind when you're picking tree species, is that overall, most areas of the county in general are kind of in this basin, but then we do kind of have this slightly higher area on the edge that is the highland rim. Thinking about soil ahead of time is also helpful in picking what type of tree you would like. These are kind of some handy ways to tell the different types. I will say overall, and I'd love to hear from others if you have other opinions, but we have a lot of clay in this area, often very, very heavy clay soil. So this is going to be, when you're watering your trees, it's maybe even more important to water slowly if you have clay soil, or else it's going to run off and it's not going to soak in like we hope it to. Right around the roots, it's going to kind of, because it's that hard clay, just going to kind of run right off the top and maybe not go exactly where you want it to. So this can kind of help in deciding what type of tree you would like as well. And I'll send out, there's a couple of videos that I really like that can show you how to tell what type of soil you have. Because you're like, I don't know, it just looks like brown dirt to me. Like, what types do we have here? I don't know if it's clay or sand or what it might need to. Thanks, Lisa. See you. She just put this in the chat. It's recorded, so you can catch up later if you'd like. I'll send these resources to where you can learn a little bit more about the different soil types. But in general, we've got a lot of clay. Here in the basin, we're also generally, there's a lot of limestone around. So we'll talk about this here in a minute, but it's very likely you'll hit rock while you're getting ready to plant your tree, while you're digging your hole. And this is okay, you can keep going. I will also say that sometimes soil can differ so greatly in a small area. I've planted a tree in my front yard and in my backyard, and I will say the conditions and the types just seemed so totally different in those small areas. So if you are, concerned about soil in a certain area, you might not have to move too far in your yard to have a different type of soil. I see from someone tons of limestone where you are. Yes, and in fact, it could have been a cedar glade. That's exactly unique kind of area in Middle Tennessee that we have this cedar glade environment that is very, very heavy limestone, definitely. So I say all that to say, like, yes, looking at the soil is helpful. Thinking about topography is helpful. But in general, trees are a little bit more like dandelions than like roses. So roses, are pretty picky. They want only a certain type of soil often. Things have to be just right in order for them to work. But in general, trees are pretty hardy and can do well in a variety of places, especially if you pick a tree that is kind of native to this area and can do well in these conditions. You'll see I've bleeped out this comic. It used to say something different right there, but I like using it so you can, don't be discouraged by this. Trees do generally do pretty well in a variety of places. All right, so other tips for kind of planting in your own yard and thinking about, all right, where exactly is the right place if I'm supposed to do right place, right tree? You really want to think about the mature size of the tree. So even if it is smaller, when you get these trees, you really want to think ahead, think for the future. How big is it going to get eventually? This can just help kind of foresee problems that might come up later. So what you're going to want to think about is this considered a canopy tree or an understory tree? And these are kind of the words we use in the biz to generally describe tree size. So that canopy trees, these are your large shade trees. That's another word we often describe shade trees. These are the ones that can get really big, like your oaks and your maples, your southern magnolias, the ones that get quite large. Or understory is kind of considered maybe 30, maybe 35 and under. And these are trees that are typically at their mature size, stay a little bit smaller. So these will be trees like redbuds, dogwoods, crab apples, even cherry. These are trees that typically will max out at maybe 25, 30 feet. And so those are considered understory. So if you are planting canopy trees, you're going to want that to be generally at least 20 feet away from your house. And that's not just for the mature size of the tree, but it's also for roots and for safety if storms were to come through. And understory, these kind of smaller species, you can get away with planting that about 10 feet away from your house and should not have any trouble with that at all. So some of these people sometimes express surprise, okay, a canopy tree that can be 60, 70 feet, maybe max, and it's okay for me to plant it 20 feet away from my house. Like I don't have to plant it, 60 or 70 feet away. This should do multiple things for you by kind of planting it this distance. It will shade your house, which can help you save on your energy bills. And as we've been feeling the past few weeks, really help you stay a lot cooler inside and outside. So there's a lot of benefits by having it at least kind of semi close to your house, as well as just the mental health benefits. Having trees out the window feels really nice. So 20 feet is kind of the general guidance for how far away you want to plant these trees, even if they do get pretty big eventually. Would recommend also kind of researching if you kind of are getting it closer to what type of tree you would like, kind of doing a little bit of research specifically on the root systems of that tree, just to kind of make sure. I would say in general, most trees, if they're canopy trees 20 feet away from your house or understory at least 10 feet, you're not going to have any problems with roots damaging the foundations of your home or sidewalks or driveways or anything like that. If it's a little closer, if you already have a tree and you're wondering, is this already causing damage? You can do just a little bit of research specific to that species that you might have. I would say there's a couple you need to watch out for. Including some of these here, silver maple, which we actually don't plant. It's kind of not a recommended tree for this reason, for their root system, but also because they kind of have weak branch structure. So we typically don't plant those trees or don't recommend them. Ash trees also have pretty aggressive roots, but with this emerald ash borer, we are definitely not planting any ash and definitely not recommending that anyone does that. And some other kind of examples are sweet gum or sycamore. But again, even if you wanted to plant sweet gum or sycamore, as long as it was further away from your house, you would not need to worry about that root system in the long term. Something interesting about just how roots grow in general is that almost all of a tree's roots are actually in the top 1.5 feet or so of soil. So you'll sometimes see those pictures or images of the picture of the tree and then an image of what the roots look like underneath, and it's almost a mirror image, right? That's actually not at all how the roots are structured on a tree. They're more like, if you can envision a wine glass on top of a pancake, the bottom of the wine glass and the pancake is where almost all of those roots are going to be. So they're pretty shallow for the most part, and they spread really, really wide past the canopy of where those leaves are, even for large trees. So this is something to think about too when you're planting multiple trees, which we'll get into in a minute. So just kind of keep in mind that almost all of those roots are actually pretty shallow. They don't go deep, they're going to go out. In this area, like we were talking about with the limestone, it is almost a given that you will hit rock while you're actually, when you found your spot, you've got your tree, you're digging your hole and you're getting ready to get it in the ground. It is very likely that you will hit rock. I will say, having dug many holes for trees myself through the Root Nashville campaign, almost all of them you can get around with a little bit of sweat equity, a little bit of work. You can kind of pull those rocks out and keep going. And they won't be, big enough to where you can't get them out. Till some of the biggest maybe I'll come across are maybe about a couple feet or so. So it's definitely some work to get those out. If it's too much trouble, you could kind of move it, a foot or so in a certain direction to make sure that, you can still kind of get it in the general location, or you could just really kind of keep working at it. There are some that you might be just totally unable to move, in which case you might have to change the location of your tree. But we get asked a lot too, like, okay, I dug this hole and there are just rocks all over the place. Is this going to harm the tree in the long run? So we would say, as long as it's not, a fully enclosed container of rock, as long as there are rocks where there's soil in between, even if it is super rocky, trees will generally find their way around those rocks. They grow in this area naturally. The roots will go where they need to. They'll find their space. And again, remember that almost all of the roots are in that top 1.5 feet of soil. So they will spread out. They will find where they need to go. Some of them, oak trees often have a tap root, and that's the one that will go, pretty deep, but almost all of them are actually out and not down. So it's generally pretty okay to continue to keep your tree in that spot, even if it does seem super rocky to you. So again, don't be too discouraged if you hit a ton of rock while you're digging. So something we also recommend when you can, and again, not all yards can accommodate this, or you might not be interested in multiple trees, but when you can, and when the space can accommodate, something we would also recommend is planting trees in clusters or in small groups whenever possible. So this really helps the trees survival and longevity and just overall health in the long run. It can also really help prevent any potential wind or storm damage. And this is because the roots, again, remember they're in the top kind of 1.5 feet of soil, they will intertwine underground. Even tree roots of different species or the same species, they will kind of help each other out by linking up underground. And this really helps in storms because it really helps stabilize them, and it helps kind of keep them rooted, keep them there, because they've got these friends kind of around them and alongside them to kind of keep them going, keep them healthy. And just think about where these trees are coming from, right? And kind of where their kind of natural habitat is, the forest, right? And what trees look like in the forest. There's generally, quite a few of them pretty close together in many cases. And this is kind of creating an entire, we're kind of trying to simulate a forest environment by planting trees a little bit closer together whenever possible, because that is, how they do well and where they're kind of come from naturally. Trees in general, they do better when they're with other trees. There's a really fabulous TED Talk and podcast and now book that talks about the relationships between trees and also the relationships between trees and fungus, this particular type of fungus called mycelium in general. So it's super interesting, and I would really recommend, I just finished this book and I'll send you all the podcast and TED Talk links as well. But there's all this pretty recent official research about fungus and trees helping each other out, trading carbon, trading nutrients. So you can kind of simulate that in your own yard by kind of putting trees a little bit closer together. They can kind of help each other out. So I will send you the link to that when you can. So yeah, we do have someone, you've listened to the TED Talks, Jen, good. This is the same person as that TED Talk, Suzanne Simard. She is fabulous and just really knows her stuff. And in this book, she's also very respectful of the fact that, yes, this information is, new and proven in Western science, but that indigenous cultures have known these things for a long time, that trees and fungus help each other out, that trees do better when they're together. So anyway, great read, great TED Talk, and I'll send you all the link to that. So what does that mean? Kind of planting in clusters, planting in groups. Typically, depending on the species, again, that's about 10 to 20 feet apart. Planting 2 trees in that way is great. 3, is even better if you kind of want to create, kind of a little triangle or a little mini forest in your yard, if possible. We definitely recommend planting in that way. Definitely think about nearby structures, right? Or anything else that you might have around, especially power lines, because we want to prevent this kind of situation from ever happening. This is not in Nashville, thankfully. I'll send out the link here to this as well, but NES, our electric service company, has guidelines about the size tree to plant far away enough from the power lines. So they actually a while ago used to have a list of power line friendly trees, like trees that you could plant under power lines, but they've really started to revise that now and say, you know what, this is better in the long run and more kind of preventative towards future problems if we're not planting trees under power lines at all. So this D category here in this image is actually shrubs. And there's kind of different examples for A, B, C, and D on this resource that I will send out to y'all. So this is kind of more your maybe, I don't know, sycamore or large oak for A, more medium size, maybe maple for B, and then kind of your understory trees here for C, like your dogwoods or your redbuds, and then shrubs for D. So this is kind of what they recommend for how far away to plant these size trees from your power lines. So this is also a really handy tool as well. So with power lines above ground, right, and thinking about, what you can see, it's also really important to know what you can't see and what's underground. So gotta always plug for this as well to make sure that you are calling 811 and submitting that ticket before you do anything in your yard, before you dig. You want to know where those lines are. This is a free service. They come out within 3 business days and mark any lines that will go into your property. So it's super handy and really helpful to know when you're doing this planning. We have an 811 tip sheet kind of on the Root Nashville website that I will also send directly to y'all if you're interested, because there is kind of a time period for when it's advised that you call 811. You're going to want to do it within 2 weeks of doing the actual digging, but you want to do it at least 3 days before you actually get it in the ground. So I'll send you that because some of that timeline can be hard to remember, but it's very important that you call. Other questions that we get pretty often about where to plant trees in your yard is about sunlight. So we get questions a lot that say, I don't have full sun in my yard. Is that okay? Like, can I plant a large tree? Or like, what do I need to keep in mind? What do I need to consider about sunlight in planting trees? So generally, this is also how you can think canopy versus understory, right? So canopy trees, again, if you think about how they are in the forest, they are the ones that get really large. So they're typically going to need full sunlight, and they're going to need more than maybe your smaller trees, your understory trees. In the forest, your understory trees are growing up underneath these larger trees. So they're going to get partial shade kind of naturally. So that's kind of how you can think about this full versus partial. I will also say, as long as it gets some sunlight, like, at least maybe 4 hours, you could plant a larger canopy tree. It will just grow a little bit slower maybe than it would be in full sun, and maybe not grow quite as large as it could be if it is in full sun also. So that's in a nutshell, right? What makes a good planting site kind of in your own yard, types of properties, and then looking at your own yard. We already did these introductions, so I think we can skip them. I think there's a couple people who have joined us since then, but maybe they can come off mute and say hi when we're chatting here. So I'm going to go ahead and keep going. And since we are a pretty small group already, I don't think we can need to go to breakout groups or anything like that. We can just kind of open it up to some conversation now, but I would love to hear just kind of general reactions to some of this, or if you have other questions that haven't been answered yet. But then would also really love to know, what do you see as a need for types of planting sites, right? Do you see certain types of property as, in greater need than others? Or what maybe parts of town do you think could use more trees? We won't worry about appointing a person to share back. I would just kind of love to open it up to you all. Questions that you still have, or areas of need that you see. I'll kind of stop sharing here.
I have a question about with the private property, if we have like a neighborhood captain and they're looking at planting at homes, for example, or like on common area land that's owned by HOAs. Is there like a certain form that has to be filled out, or something to give like grant permission for planting?
Great question. So most HOAs operate a little differently. So there's, it will depend on it per HOA area, kind of what their rules are. We love working with HOAs, and it's absolutely possible for planting captains to bring trees to either common areas that are owned by the HOA, or, front and backyards that are in an HOA but still kind of owned by the person. It would just have to be a kind of a case-by-case basis. It's usually asking the board of that HOA, saying like, hey, we're interested in bringing trees. Are there landscape requirements? What are the bylaws for us to plant? Some are stricter than others. Some, even if it is, you want to plant a tree in your front or backyard, there's still some rules that need to be followed. Others are much more open, say, oh yeah, that's your own area. You can plant what you want. But in terms of getting it approved for a common area, like around a playground or a pool or just common green space or something like that, we would usually go to the board, and we would need a some kind of conversation or agreement about who would water those trees. The Cumberland River Compact does have a tree care program that does water trees over the summers, and it's we can talk about like costs and contracting and all of that if that is a need. Otherwise, we would just need confirmation from either the maintenance company or the HOA board that those trees would be cared for in the long run. So that was a long answer. Maybe it didn't even answer your question. Jen, is that what you were looking for?
Yeah, I think that answers it. Because I was planning on chatting with my neighborhood at our HOA meeting. It's next week, I believe, and just seeing if we could find a neighborhood captain in our area, because we are like, some of the neighborhood is maybe like 15 years old, and then some of it's pretty new construction, and it's probably a good area where, you know, some of the trees were poorly planted or maintained, and some of them, like, through, you know, landscaping practices, and we had that derecho storm came right through here and uprooted a lot of things. So it would probably be a good opportunity. But I'm wondering, like, do you ever have, for maintenance and watering, do you ever have like families sponsor a tree or something like that, where it's like, okay, my family's going to water, you know, not on a main road, but within a neighborhood, my family's going to adopt this tree and water it?
Sure, sure. Yeah, yeah. It can be, you know, a hodgepodge of volunteer, like, okay, we have these 10 trees. Each one has been adopted by a family. As long as there's some kind of watering in place, that's all that we look for in order to kind of approve it as a planting site. It can be, you know, adopted by, you know, a group of people or by some individuals. I think that's awesome, actually. That kind of promotes, you know, stewardship of the land, and, you know, can teach some kids some good lessons perhaps. So it can be, it doesn't have to be a formal landscaping company necessarily that's doing the watering. It could absolutely be an adoption strategy.
Cool.
Let's do it. Let's get a captain in your neighborhood. Happy to answer any questions that might pop up from that, Jen.
Do you have, because I was just going to share the website, like, do you have any quick resources of, if I was going to like explain to them what the program is, that maybe you could email?
Absolutely. Yeah, we have kind of a one pager that might even be easier than the website. The website kind of has everything, but also we can talk about this offline if you want. But if it would be helpful, I'd be happy to attend the meeting too and kind of talk about it. But we can talk about that later if you'd like.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Great. George and Hans, I think you came in a little bit later, so I might pick on either one of you if you will just kind of want to say hi and where you're coming from. I think you're return participants, so nice to see you again. Anything you're thinking about, you know, need in your area, or do you have kind of ideas for planting sites in your area that you might want to consider in the future?
Yes, hello.
Hi, George.
I'm looking at planting some trees in a common area on Doverside Drive. That's a road that was cut through several years ago before they built Walmart. And I've been looking at that for some time, but I didn't know how to go about getting it done. Plant some trees along the sidewalk that's coming down into the Parkwood neighborhood. I probably don't need you to come to one of our meetings or kind of walk us through to tell us the step that we need to take to get that done.
I'm sorry, you said you would like that, or you know?
Yeah, I would like that.
Yeah. I wasn't sure if you said would or wouldn't. I was like, ooh, that was an important word for me to not hear. And that I would be absolutely happy to do that. And you're at Parkwood neighborhood?
Parkwood Neighborhood Association. We meet every third Saturday at Parkwood Community Center at 10 o'clock.
Great.
And
so did you just have a meeting, or are you about to have a meeting?
We're about to have a meeting. We'll have a meeting on the third Saturday.
Third. Okay, perfect. Great. Yeah, let's take that. Let's continue that conversation after this as well. I'd be more than happy to talk to you all about that. That's great. Yeah. Again, let's make it happen. Let's do it. Thanks for being an advocate for your neighborhood.
Thank you.
Are you a beautification commissioner as well, George?
Yes, I am. And
I
also,
thought so.
also president of our association.
Great. Perfect. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
I know Hans is thinking about some planting sites as well. I wonder if that project has come down the pipeline anymore. Yeah.
Hi, Meg.
Hi.
Yeah. I'm actually living in Westmead, and we have a lot of trees, as I explained in other meetings. But I was thinking whether the tree advocates of the city could ask that during development in the city are small areas left free from buildings so that trees can be, so just like little parks, it can be just square, the trees can be planted there. And I see it in other cities, that people would gather there and enjoy trees. And that would actually add to the tree canopy in the city, because there will be needed. But I don't know whether there's any mechanism in place where that can be done. But if all NGOs would home in on council members and say, we need that, we need these little parks, maybe something can be done.
I love that, mini parks. So you're thinking in terms of where they could go.
Yeah.
What types of property are you thinking? Are you thinking it would be like private, or it would be public?
Yeah, it could be private, it could be public. Both. Well, public would be much easier than private because it's city owned.
Right.
Then, yeah.
Right.
Council or planning commission or whatever could decide. But there must always be some pressure until something happens.
I would love a mini park in my own neighborhood. I'll tell you that for sure. And I know other kind of nonprofits to follow kind of related to this work. You're probably already familiar with them, Hans, but I'll just say this for the benefit of the group is definitely the National Tree Conservation Corps, but also the Civic Design Center does a lot of work in kind of visioning and designing. And I know they're kind of involved in several kind of urban planning type projects. I know they're involved with a potential park that might come up here in Madison, actually, and they're doing some of the kind of community outreach and listening to kind of make that happen. So I think it's kind of keeping an eye on those types of groups as well and participating, like you were saying, Hans, when there are opportunities, kind of being an advocate in that way, kind of speaking up. So I'll definitely be hoping that there's lots of people come to that meeting that the Civic Design Center is leading for the Madison Park to kind of speak up in favor of it. I think it is kind of going to be a little bit more of this mini park design, where it doesn't have to be big for us to have a lot of the benefits of the green space in the area.
Little space in between the buildings.
Absolutely. And I think the more we can do in our yards too, we can almost create mini parks, if it's 2 yards next to each other, if it's you and your neighbor who kind of get together and decide, let's create this beautiful green space with native plants and trees in our area, can really make a big difference and hopefully kind of sweep the whole street and kind of inspire everyone. These kinds of things can start, it's pretty cheesy, but can start one tree at a time too.
Yeah. How much influence does Root Nashville have in such a development or such possibilities? I don't know.
Yeah. So it's kind of broad in some ways. So it kind of depends on what angle you want to take. But because the campaign is set up as a public-private partnership, we have the nonprofit side and also the Metro side. So depending on, what the property is or how it works, we can kind of go, different angles. But the campaign itself also does not do kind of general advocacy. We have some kind of friends and partners who kind of take on that role because we are, partner of Metro and a Metro initiative. We don't take on that kind of work, but in terms of working with developers, working with neighborhoods, that's definitely our kind of particular sweet spot. but we are lucky to have so many different tree partners in Nashville as well, and lucky that it can also kind of be this kind of collective effort. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Hans.
Sorry, my phone is ringing. You have to mute.
No worries. No worries. We're actually right at noon right now. Look at that. So happy to kind of hang on for another minute or two if there are any other questions, but or comments, or but if anyone needs to head out, needs to eat lunch, your stomach is growling, feel free. I will send both the recording of the session, if you know anyone who wasn't able to come and wants to listen in, as well as the slides and the links to some of these things that we had mentioned, especially the one pager about the captain program, seeing if we can schedule some neighborhood meetings, and some information about TDOT and the state roads. So let me know if there's anything else that I missed there, but really great to talk with you all this morning, I guess, still morning. And thanks for being here. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Would love to have you all back for the next session on September 9th, which is about kind of the long term. Okay, you've got the trees. How do we keep them alive? What are some maintenance tips about that? So would love to have you all back for that. And thanks very much.
Thanks, Meg, for all your help.
Yeah.
Of course.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.